All right, we are live.
Live.
Okay, so the meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the February 17th, 2022 meeting of the City of Asheville Noise Advisory Board. I'm the chair of this board, Jessica Thomason. All committee members and staff are participating virtually today. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked to the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you out there that are with us today, welcome. I will now go through and introduce all the board members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Board members, as I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Charles Beck.
Here.
Rick Freeman.
Here.
James Corbin Harwood.
Here.
Anoop Krishan. Anoop is not present. Carmelo Papilonio.
Here.
Jessica Thomason, present. Jeff Santiago.
Here.
And Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good afternoon.
Also with us today are several staff members. Granier Meiser.
Yes, hi.
Daniel Oropesa.
Here.
Haley Mahoney.
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
And last but not least, Ben Woody. All right, so
Hey. I'm here.
Ben. Our first order of business is approval of the January 10th meeting minutes. Is there any discussion on the minutes from January 10th? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, so roll call to yay or nay. Rick Freeman,
Yay.
Corbin Harwood,
Yay.
Carmelo,
Yay.
Jeff,
Yay.
Antoinette,
Aye, but I don't think I'm a part of the voting board.
Oh, okay. You are, okay, got it. And myself, yay. Okay, so minutes from January 10th are approved. Next order of business will be the staff report from Granier Meiser and Daniel Oropesa.
I'm going to share my screen here.
Yeah. Good. Good.
Everyone see that?
Everybody see that? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
We just made a little
Yes.
bit of thank you. We just made a little bit of an edit. I'm gonna take this off just.
Okay, yeah. go ahead.
Just to, one of the things that we added since the last meeting was that we thought it was important to add, I mean, everybody did get this ahead of time and hopefully everyone is able to review it. Some of these numbers, we don't have to go through everything. Just some things that are a little different is that we'll still have the amount of complaints that were received since our last meeting, but we also thought it was important to show how we are receiving these complaints. Obviously through APD, direct emails, online, etc., just so everyone gets at least a view of how we're getting some of our information. Some of the trends that we're seeing that still are steady, and probably because of the time of year, is residential neighbor complaints. We had a total of 44 residential neighbor complaints in the last 30 days. Keep in mind that 34 of those are from multifamily units. So later, give me 1 second. So that's just one of the things that we did discuss, that we are seeing a trend because of the time of year. More people are indoors because it's cold. Bars and music venues and stuff like that really haven't cranked up yet. So this is a time where Rania and I took advantage of that time, and we'll explain to you later what we had hoped to do, the goals we wanted to meet, and we actually did meet those goals. Does anybody have any questions on the trends right now? Oh, seconds. Okay, since I really can't see, I'm looking backwards, so if you really just shout out if you have
Yeah,
questions.
does anyone have any questions on the trends, the numbers?
Okay. I'm gonna keep moving forward. Out of all the complaints and of what we've done, actually, not just the past month, but in the last couple of months, one of the challenges that we continue to see and that we're gonna bring up further down the road in terms of conversation with the board is subjective complaints. In a lot of places where we can't take decibel readings, or it's a he said, she said type of situation. Subjective complaints are very hard to tackle. They're very hard to, we become the mediator, we're the referee in a lot of situations, and that is really difficult. If somebody calls in a complaint, we take it serious, we investigate it, but sometimes we speak or we investigate the noisemaker and we realize there's 3 sides to every story. So it makes it very difficult. So that's something that will come up, that we'll discuss later on, probably in another meeting, but we just wanted to bring it up now since we are seeing that. Things that are working well. Earlier we had said one of our goals from last meeting for the first quarter was the management owner involvement and the relationships that we're trying to make with a lot of the property owners, apartment complex managers, and so forth. Ryan and I we hit the pavement, and we actually were able to meet out of the 34 private property management companies, the actual offices. We met face to face with all of them in the past month to have this talk to see how they handle noise complaints. What do they do? What are their protocols? What they have in place? And it's pretty interesting on all the information we found out.
And where we can help them with those.
And we always offered our help with the Housing Authority property managers. We actually met with 7 of them virtually. Those were great meetings with them. Got a lot of information. They were very grateful because we now have been working with them for the last 2 or 3 months. So it was a matter of actually matching a face to the name. And they were really nice meetings. We actually met with 7 of them in just the last 3 weeks. And so once again, in the situation with us taking advantage of meeting property managers, it's because we will get a complaint from a tenant and there are protocols in place for where they live. And now in just the last 3 months, we've noticed that those numbers have decreased because they are not only contacting us, but they know that we're going to circle back to their manager and say, hey, has Betty from 101 called you? They'll either say, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, or we're working with Betty. We know this noisemaker tenant is an issue, and these are protocols that we have in place for them. So that's been working out really well. So we're really happy about that. Another goal that we did meet that we wanted to ramp up for this time of year, where although they were response-based, was a fieldwork report. I hope everybody got the fieldwork report. Ryan, do you want to explain this one a little?
Sure. The fieldwork report is largely based on a complaint. So if we have a complaint, we may reach out to the business owner, business operator, and see about addressing the complaint, what they're going to do to try and mitigate it. If that, we may go through that process, we may go straight to this, but one way or the other, we may end up trying to work with the business owner. A lot of noise complaints come in and people will say, well, it's 2 or 3 nights a week at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, that's not something that we're able to address in that moment. Number one, because of the hours, but secondly, because of it's sometimes random. There isn't a pattern where we can actually go out and be there and catch it in the moment. And obviously we need to be able to do that if we're going to determine whether a decibel level is compliant or not. So one thing we've started working with is also, again, a bit more of the collaborative approach that we always wanted to address noise with as a city, is reaching out to the venue owner or the venue operator and having us come out and do some readings with them and work with them and their engineer if they have an engineer. In those cases, we will let the complainant know that that's going to happen, because we will take readings from the complainant's property line, so they'll be aware that it's happening. Then based on what we saw or experienced or what readings we got at that moment, we will then write up a little bit of a report, work with the venue operator, have a look around the property, see if there are things we can see at that moment in time to actually that might mitigate the noise. And also type up this report, send it to both parties. Usually our MO on that is I will call the complainant the morning after we've been out to the property, and I will let them know that the report will be emailed to them. The example that we gave you here, I spoke with the complainant before we went over, and after we went out and took the readings, and he was actually really gracious. He was very grateful that we went out and did it. We made a determination. He said it sounded loud to him. It was in compliance with the ordinance, and he was very accepting of that, but also very grateful that he knew one way or the other. So we did make some recommendations in that one. We would probably look to do that always, or trying to have some discussion with the operators about how we might mitigate noise, even if the sound is in compliance, just as part of that better goodwill that we would try and bring to these. It also helps us going forward when we are working proactively with owners or operators, because we're bringing our good faith to make sure they're in compliance. And I would hope that effort creates a relationship for us to have with them, so that if we have to come back to them a second time, we've already made this effort to ensure they're in compliance, not just for their sake, but for the complainants. And so we've had really good response from the two cases that we've done with that since we met you last. And in both cases, the complainant said, well, thank you for doing it. At least we know. I'm sure that the sound may be still audible to them, but they know that in a decibel zoning scenario, that the actual noise that they were reporting, or actually music that they were reporting, was actually in compliance with the permitted decibel levels in that zoning district. Anybody got any questions on those?
Rick does.
Rick, go ahead.
Thanks. So it goes back to what Daniel was talking about with the multifamily stuff. It's not clear to me what the exact guidance is you guys are giving to multifamily managers and tenants.
Okay.
And maybe I just forgot it from last time, but are we still encouraging the tenants to file noise complaints via any of the methods that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we won't lose those complaints because
Correct.
they're going to the managers first.
Correct.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right. And so, Rick, what we're really trying to do is, again, we can't be in the moment at an apartment complex at 11:30 at night. Just from the field work that we did in January, we're discovering a lot of them do have courtesy officers. And honestly, it kind of shows in the data, because a lot of them we've never had any complaints from, but those people will address things in the moment. We are encouraging people to certainly continue to communicate with us, but as far as addressing the problem within their apartment complex, the property managers are probably best placed initially to do that. And if that's not resolving for them, or not being resolved for them, we are communicating with the property managers that, the ordinance does allow for the property owner, which would be them in that case, to be cited. But honestly, the meetings that we've had have been so positive. I think the property owners feel quite supportive that, you know, if they're running into a brick wall, that they've got us to fall back on, and be able to collaborate with us and say, I can't get any good of this tenant. We've made it very clear to them that we're not trying to be punitive here. We're not looking for people to be evicted. All of them have internal processes for noise themselves also, in addition to the ordinance. So yes, we're certainly not encouraging them to only go there. They can certainly come back. So if we get the complaint via APD, Rick, what we would want that complainant to do when we follow up with them is for them to have us be their point of contact, so that we can manage it for them rather than going back through that big circle again. But absolutely, they can submit the complaint through whatever form is convenient and best for them.
And just one more on multifamily.
Sure.
In having conversations with the complainants when they're willing, are you hearing of any concerns that being a complainer would put their tenancy at risk?
No, we have not. We have, again, like I say, the outreach that we did in January was very labor intensive, but it's very worthwhile. We had some great conversations with property managers. We've never got that, but I think the two things that we've always said to complainants: if you ever feel in danger, you should always, or if you ever feel somebody else is in danger, you should always call APD. But I assume that just by the relationship that we would start to develop with the complainant, and we would follow up with to see if their complaint had been dealt with, that they would be comfortable enough to let us know. I'm not sure what role we would have in that scenario, to be honest with you, but I'm sure they would let us know. We have not had that experience to date, Rick.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I think what's important to know about, in terms of when someone makes a complaint with their property manager, and we've come across this now a little more less now, and then we talk about it with their managers. If they don't say this to anyone, we'll get you did nothing about it, or the police did nothing about it, or my manager does anything about it. And one of our first questions is, who did you report this to? Well, no one yet. So we're like, well, someone needs to know. Someone has to start the chain. A few times we facilitate that role to start, because we'll say, hey, would you like me to contact your property manager? And we always remind them, you might not be the only person complaining about apartment 101. And that's when the light bulb goes on. I'm like, you might be one of 4 people. And this gives your property manager leverage to enforce the rules that you have, enforce rules and regulations that where you signed a dotted line on a lease, it says you can't do this, this, and this. Brian and I can't micromanage a property manager. That's not our job. But our job is, sometimes we have to ask, hey, what did end up happening with that? A lot of times they got a violation, their lease is no longer eligible for renewal. So something has been done because finally the person did report the incident. But it just surprises us so many times where the complainant will say, well, I haven't told anyone, or haven't said anything, or they were cautious to call APD or whatever the situation. So the fact that we followed up, they were so happy because we got that rolling with them.
And I think that follow-up gives them a little bit of support if they are concerned about dealing with their property managers directly, and that may be a perfectly valid concern that they have. I think the fact that we've reached out and said we've received your complaint, we want to get some more information, we're going to work with you through this. But one of the things that has to happen is the property manager has to be involved in this. But I think for us to have that connection with them and for them to have our cell phone numbers may afford them in that situation where people may be concerned, or not concerned that there might be some retaliation, but maybe just unsure that there might be. And I think having that relationship helps a little bit for everybody's purpose. But I mean, the property manager ultimately has to be included in that conversation. Is that okay, Rick? We good? Thank you.
That's not.
So does anyone have any other questions about the staff report or the field report, or any comments or feedback on the field report? I'll explain Corbin. Go ahead, Corbin.
Yes. So I actually experienced it as a business owner. Daniel, you came out and saw me. I got to say, from my perspective, it was extremely helpful because I got to see not only where the noise complaint was coming from, but also what it sounded like and where I'm at from a decibel level, which, you know, luckily I was under where I needed to be. But what the process itself for me, and I've been doing this for a little while, it was extremely helpful. So I just want to kind of say thanks to you guys for doing that.
Thank you. That's really
It really is helpful to have someone from the city come out at 12 o'clock at night, meet with me in the standing cold, and have an honest conversation. Like, okay, I see why they're complaining, but somebody just told a big joke and everybody's laughing and the laughter has carried, and it's like, or a scream or something has happened of loudness, and it doesn't necessarily. It's obviously loud, but it's not breaking the law. And so being able to find that little buffer and just kind of have a sense of comfort from a business standpoint, and also letting you know what I've done and what I can do, because Daniel gave me some great options as well. So extremely beneficial. I think even though this is all kind of crazy and there's a lot of stuff going on, the process of field work is really beneficial.
Thank you, Corbin.
Corbin, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And Graham and I have brought it up. Thank you for bringing it up. Because as a board member, I wanted to be, I wasn't,
we were.
I wasn't going to say, well, I was over at Corbin's place. But the good thing about that situation is that the complainant for your situation, the email reply was so grateful of saying, hey, I get it. At least someone was there. I really appreciate it. I saw the time you were there, which was in that scope of 10:30 and 12:30. So I think I was at your place around 11:30, 11:45.
Yep.
And then you were in full swing, but it was just what we're saying. All the parties are involved.
Yeah.
And the fact that the complainant was appreciative of saying, and ever since that, they have not called back, because it's probably about the same level of noise. And they realized they had the same information that you got, except names are crossed out, they're for protection, but all the information's there. So thank you for bringing it up.
Of course.
Thank you. And Corbin, I would add my thanks to that, my gratitude to that, because just given the scope of what we may be dealing with two people trying to do this, and essentially we're administrative staff, we do schedule to go out. But I think that's what I was trying to explain earlier about the goodwill in this. I think there's a sense of goodwill for all parties involved. And the other one that we gave as the example, the gentleman, I told him, I said, this is the only way for us to determine if there's a violation or not. And I have to hope and expect that the potential or the noisemaker at this point is going to crank the music up as loud as it can and work with us, that the good faith effort that we're bringing to this. And I think that that's really important, again, for just that whole collaborative approach to living with a level of noise and collaborating to find a space for everybody to be, at least aware of what that level of noise is. In this case, also, this gentleman did email us back the next day and say he really appreciated our follow-up, our, communication with them, and thanked us. So thank you again. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. Absolutely.
The last thing to wrap up, the report that we sent you was coming up is a similar situation with field work reports. Since we really didn't have a season, we really came into this in September, October. We didn't have the spring and summertime. So it's already on the website where venues, and we're going to reach out to venues that we did have a little interaction with by the end of last
The end
quarter.
of last year, yeah.
We're going to reach out to them to do proactive work to see when they're going to start outdoor music, if they're going to have live bands, DJs. We're going to go out there to take field measurements with them before they even start the event, even a week or two before, just so they know their levels, where they are, where we can help them. And then that way we're having a proactive approach versus always responding to something. So this way we can say, hey, we've already been to bar ABC. We know where their levels are. We know they have live music, DJ music, and even the night of the event, we can schedule to be there just to make sure they're in compliance.
Yeah.
So if we get a complaint the next day, we kind of have something to go by.
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, just maybe a hint for Daniel and you, Grania. I did a bunch of research on this back in the day, and it depends a ton on the temperature, the humidity, and the wind direction on the actual decibels felt at the complainant site.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might just want to start to capture that information when you're either doing proactive field work or responding to a complaint, because it would just be it'd be painful to the venue to feel like they were rock solid, but all the measurements were when it was cold and dry and not windy. And then the first time we get a typical day in the summertime, which is when people are going to be on their decks and stuff like that, suddenly they're out of spec. So just a thought for future
Absolutely,
work.
you're absolutely right. The humidity has a big bearing, and of course, right now we've got very little vegetation on trees, and we don't have air conditioners running. So it is a moving target for sure. Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
So anybody got anything else on the staff report or the field report? We're good to move on if nobody has any other questions. If you do, we can circle back, but it's fine.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Our next order of business is to address the mission statement. Vice Chair Rick Freeman and I worked on a draft for that. So hopefully you've had an opportunity, board members, to take a look at it. I'll go ahead and read it so everybody can hear it out loud. The mission of the Noise Advisory Board is to evaluate the effectiveness of the revised ordinance regarding noise regulation and related city policies, with the goal of developing recommendations regarding amendments, additions, or deletions. The Noise Advisory Board will also evaluate the effectiveness of enforcement of the ordinance in regards to response times, compliance rates, distribution of complaints, and ensuring equitable outcomes. We will propose long-term objectives for achieving reduced levels of sound for our business and residential communities and propose means for implementing such objectives. So I want to open it up for discussion with the board on the draft mission statement. Any comments, questions?
I like it. I think it's pretty simple, straightforward. It did bring up a question that I had, though, and maybe somebody on the board knows, maybe we don't, and maybe it's just irrelevant, but has the city discussed anything? I remember reading something briefly about creating entertainment districts. Is that still on the table, or is that just kind of far off? Like creating an entertainment district? Does anybody
from the
think
city?
about that?
Ben, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so Corbin, that's a really, really good memory. During the process of drafting the ordinance, a lot of participants pointed to Raleigh. So Raleigh has this concept of entertainment districts where they basically allow certain parts of the city to be louder than others. I think there's special permitting that goes along with that.
Yeah.
But that's about as far as that is just kind of a comparison point during the adoption process for the ordinance, but we haven't done anything with it since those meetings and those long discussions.
Cool. Thank you. I was just asking. It brought it up when I was listening to that, but I like it. I like it a lot.
Any other comments or questions about the draft mission statement before we go to vote on it? No. Oh, okay.
Looks good.
Yeah, I think it looks good. It's solid. It's nice and succinct. I have no issues with it. It's more just a clarifying question when, as far as the wording of evaluating the effectiveness of enforcement of the ordinance in regards to XYZ. Does that statement, the effectiveness of enforcement, does that also include any sort of conversation or input around who responds or what's group, agency, department response, or is that something that we do not have any sort of say in? Because I just am asking because of our conversation regarding who in particular responds last session.
Jessica, I'd try to take a shot at that if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So when I was thinking of this, I think that it's the board's responsibility to understand both sides of enforcement, regardless of who is performing the enforcement. So certainly the complainant, they have an opinion about what good enforcement is, and they're taxpayers and voters. So regardless of the challenges we have with the understaffed APD at this time, we shouldn't leave that out of our evaluation as a board, because we're supposed to make policy recommendations to city council on this, right? So if the citizens would give us a D on enforcement because there's not enough enforcement personnel in either Ben staff or APD to get there in time to cause their pain to go away, then I don't feel like we'd be doing our job if we didn't listen to them and score enforcement appropriately. Same way on behalf of the noisemaker, if we can't get out there and enforcement can't get out there and prove that they're in compliance and they've done everything they needed to do, and there's still a whole bunch of social media buzz about why they're a bad whatever, that's again within our venue to evaluate that and make policy recommendations. And I don't know what those recommendations will be, but I think we should look at it holistically.
So affirmative, I guess we are providing input as to what parties may be responding and providing enforcement then, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you. That helps. Other than that, it looks great. It's nice and succinct. It's good.
I think, again, just to reiterate what we've said in the past, that this is a new advisory board and things are going to change. And so I think as we move along, we'll just have to all be, I think we'll be looking at all avenues of that. And that's definitely, when we put this together, was something that Rick and I talked about, is really being able to see, based on the reports that we were getting, and as we'll get into with new business, about the data and the information we're getting, of where any parts of gaps of enforcement, effective enforcement is, and make considerations accordingly based on where we're falling short with that. So yeah, so that's definitely something that we had in mind when we put this together. Any other questions or comments before I ask for a motion to approve? No? Okay. So moving along, can I get a motion to approve the mission statement for the Noise Advisory Board?
Motion to approve.
Great. Thank you, Corbin. Can I get a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Jeff. We got a second from Jeff Santiago. Now, if we can have a roll call to vote. Let's see. Rick Freeman.
Yay.
Charles Beck.
Yay.
Carmelo Apollonio.
Yay.
And yay for Jessica Thomason. So the motion to approve the motion to approve the mission statement for the Noise Advisory Board has been passed. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that. And now, next order of old business is to hear from Chris Collins on an update of the outdoor performance venues.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know you've heard a little bit about performance venue regulations from Ben, but I want to give you a little more of a detailed look at what we're drafting up. I'm going to take over the screen share real quick.
Hey, Corbin, could you mute? There we go.
All right. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so just the background on this, basically, through the process of the noise ordinance development, it became clear to us that a use that we don't have any specified zoning standards for is outdoor performance venues. And that's becoming a more popular use. So that was a recommendation that came out of our work on the noise ordinance, was to take a look at how zoning approaches those outdoor performance venues. So what we have now, right now, we allow outdoor performance venues as just performance centers. So there's no differentiation made between indoor and outdoor uses right now. So it's an indoor music hall or it's an outdoor music arena. It's treated the same way as zoning, and there are no special standards to mitigate community impacts. Now we talk about noise here, but this is a broader approach too. There's large venues, gatherings, and shows have a lot of impacts that have to be managed and inspected, from noise to traffic to crowd control to all that stuff. So it's not just noise, but we'll think about it from a noise perspective today. And like I said, the noise ordinance work that was done did identify the need for these standards. So right now it is allowed in 10 commercial zoning districts, and that's nearly all of our commercial zoning districts. So you can pretty much just go install this anywhere. So what we're looking at right now doing is create 2 new land use types. Both of those we have an outdoor performance venue, which you'll hear us call primary use, and an outdoor performance venue as an accessory use. All right, so I'll show you a definition of that in just a minute, but that's like, hey, I run a bar, but I want to add an outdoor performance area in the back or something like that, as opposed to I want to buy a piece of land and just establish a place that does its primary use is performance. The recommendation is to allow this by right with specific development standards in 5 zoning districts. So that does cut down the number of zoning districts where it would happen. I say 5 zoning districts. 2 of those zoning districts have a ton of districts within them. That's the River Arts Forum District and the Haywood Road Forum District, but we're just counting those as one district each for simplicity's sake, because we have a lot of zoning districts in Asheville. And then the plan is to allow with a special use permit in the Central Business District. We did learn that close proximity downtown, you need to approach this use, not disallow it, but approach it a little more cautiously and figure out where the right place to go is. So a special use permit is something that does require a quasi-judicial hearing. It does require city council approval. So that's the difference there. And you can attach certain conditions and standards to that permit to help it kind of fit better. And we're looking to establish development and operational standards for accessory uses. And that's kind of our first go at this, but that is a big neighborhood impact we've found lately. And at the same time, reduce the duration allowed for temporary use permits. We now allow 6 months under a temporary use permit. So this is not effective if somebody can still just pull a temporary use permit to have live music outdoors with no standards for 6 months out of the year. So we have to roll that back a little too. And it is unusual for us to allow 180-day activity under a temporary use permit. It's not something you find at most cities. So there might be a reason for that. But we're working on that now. So diving into it, let's take a look at defining some uses. So right now, and you'll see a couple of places where I'll tell you there's still some things we're trying to figure out the right number for, the right direction, but the structure is there. So we would define an outdoor performance venue as is stated up here, and that's going to be a place where more than 20% of the site is dedicated to outdoor performance, right? It can have other things going on, but more than 20% of the site area is strictly for outdoor performance. And we've also been looking at, it would also, or it could also have less than 20% and have a certain number of occupancy allowed, certain number of people. Because again, managing these impacts is not just about the noise, it's about the traffic, the crowd control, and all that stuff. So that's kind of your threshold there. That said, an outdoor performance venue accessory would be a place where less than 20% of the site area is used for an outdoor performance area. So think, neighborhood bar that opens up a stage outside and charges for shows. They add that on to their primary use, which is the bar, the tavern, the restaurant, whatever it may be. So the goal here would be to regulate these two uses slightly differently. They do present different challenges. So that's why we split them up like this. The other thing we'll introduce are parking standards. We don't have any specified parking standards for this type of use in our zoning at this time. And that's what we're proposing right now to do, base the parking standards purely on the maximum allowed occupancy that they're given by a building and fire when they open up a business. So that would be 1 space per 3, a minimum, 1 space per 2 is a maximum. That follows our standard format for parking ratios. We always do a minimum and a maximum. All right, so let's look at primary uses first. So I just drew a little picture here just to talk about the concepts and what we're looking at doing. So the main tools for mitigating impacts here are, well, you just saw one of them, parking standards to help control parking and vehicular impacts. But as far as noise goes, the ordinance is going to set forth a minimum size for a piece of land that can be used for a primary outdoor performance venue. Right now we have 1.5 acres in there. We feel pretty good about that, but we're still kind of finalizing that that's the right number. But the concept here is it would need to be a larger piece of land. And it would require that a buffer be installed around the property and be 100 feet from residential zoning. And that's to establish a new outdoor performance venue. That's all they do, right? Well, they do other things on the side. They maybe sell some pizza and some beer, but the main reason they're there is for that outdoor performance use. And you can see it's indicated here. It also, the ordinance draft right now does its best to get folks to direct the sound away from the direction where people live, residential areas and things like that. We would require a sound impact plan. Now that was what was defined in the noise ordinance of what folks need to give us when they are, seeking a sound exceedance permit. So it's the same document if someone wants to exceed their decibels or whatever through the sound exceedance permit, we would ask for a sound impact plan. We would require that to establish this use. And that is, we've got a checklist, go through, show us how this is not going to be, show us how you're going to manage your noise, right? At the onset. A lot of what we heard with some things was let's incorporate this into the development process. Let's make sure people know from the get-go what they need to do from a noise perspective, even though noise control isn't zoning. There's a lot to be gained for the person who's trying to, for the business owner and for the neighborhood to get into this process early. And then, of course, we said requiring a special use permit in the central business district. So that's downtown only, city council approval. All right, let's look at accessory uses. Now, this is less than 20% of the site is being used for an outdoor performance venue, and nothing's to scale here. So don't check my percentages, just illustrative here. So in this case, let's say the primary use here, whatever it may be, restaurant, bar, they just come in, put in a stage with amplification and don't want to do anything else to the site. The ordinance is going to require that it be 500 feet from residential zoning. And that's just, like I said, plopping in the stage, amplified speakers, and go. There are some options built in though, right now. If a landscape buffer is installed with a certain density of evergreen planting, then that distance can be reduced to 100 feet. or if a sound attenuating wall, which we define in the ordinance, we're going to define a little more. Right now it's defined as being 6 inches in width, 8 feet in height, and there's going to be a little more that goes into the definition. So it's a substantial wall now, but we're going to try and define that out a little harder. So like the densely planted landscape buffer, the sound wall would allow that area to be reduced from 500 feet to 100 feet to residential zoning. Okay. Bear with me here. Thought I had one more. Okay, that's the last slide. That's why I wouldn't go any further. So that's the basics of the structure of this ordinance and where we're going with it right now. It's about sound attenuation and distance, parking standards, and minimum lot size, and sound impact plans for the primary uses. So we kind of try and keep it simple. A lot of these, where we see our accessory uses, a lot of these are corridors where they back up to residential areas. So Haywood Road, things like that. That's where you run into a lot of these, and that's where a lot of our conflicts come up in the sound and noise realm. This would not affect existing businesses. So if a business is legally permitted prior to this ordinance taking effect, they would have a non-conforming right to continuing operating. So since this is zoning and not noise, it works a little differently. So anybody who's got an existing situation that falls under these regs would not be pushed into these regulations. And right now, this is the first committee that's had, first board that's had a look at this. So we're pretty early on in the process. So I will stop talking and field any questions you have at this time.
Charlie, you have a question?
Yeah, actually a couple, Chris. So since it doesn't apply to existing businesses, what happens when, and I'll use a case in point downtown, if they build the high-rise affordable housing next to the bus station, are you going to discourage them from building 50 feet away from a performance stage?
So the use causing, so let me see if I can get the wording right on what I'm trying to say here. So the need for that distance would be necessitated by the installation of the new performance venue. And I get what you're saying. You're going to have a new residential use go up next to an existing outdoor performance venue. You might still get some impacts from that you're going to hear from the residents or whatever. But these rules wouldn't apply to it just because they are crafted for the installation of the venue rather than the tower or the residential new development that we're talking about.
Right, but the essence of the question, though, Chris, is that if Dogwood Health Trust in the city builds the facility 50 feet from a sound stage, would you be best to discourage them from putting that building up because, anybody in their right mind knows they're going to basically complain once they're living that close to an event?
Yeah, and the important thing is you use the word discourage, because we can certainly tell them and say, with our experience with working with noise and such, this isn't a great location for a residential project, or you may need to think about doing heavier sound installation in your project. I don't think we wouldn't have any way to prohibit them from doing it. But I think one of the good things about noise being in a development services now is that we kind of know that world, and we can talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one last question: if you have a venue in place already, are you going to limit someone coming in next door to that and next door to that in an entertainment district, to use Corbin's note, and then all of a sudden you have radiation of sound from potentially multiple outdoor venues, accessory or primary?
So in a hypothetical world where this ordinance is passed, so any newly established outdoor performance venue would be required to adhere to this. So
right, but again, the essence of my question is: are you going to allow multiple ones? I'll take a hypothetical. Someone buys the lot across from Rabbit where the Mountain Trust building is and puts up another venue. are you going to, through zoning, say, not a good idea, one's already here?
We don't have anything like that built in now. The only place where that could come into play is like when we talk about downtown and the special use permit, because that does go through city council. That could be a consideration when looking at that as an area got a proliferation of these things or something like that. Otherwise, it's right now just treated like any other use in zoning. So if it's allowed in that district and it can meet those supplemental standards, it would be allowed to go in. I'm not sure if we wanted to. I'm not sure exactly how to implement kind of a density standard, a density of performance venue standard in there. I'd have to do some digging and see if that's even something we can scratch really well legally. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Rick, you had your hand up. I think you're muted.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
Are you going to invite people in to review this, Chris, and engage from both the venue and the public before you started down the approval process?
I would like to get some feedback in some way. We haven't figured out the best way to go about it yet. We already kind of had the charge to do something from the noise ordinance. And what we've looked for guidance so far is other folks who are regulating this, which surprisingly in North Carolina, there's very few. Wilmington did just recently introduce some standards that are similar to what we're proposing now, but we've also taken stuff from other places that have found the need to regulate outdoor performance venues, such as Austin, Texas, and New Orleans, and much bigger places, but still urban sound problems and those kind of things. So I'd like to try and hit existing platforms to let people know and get them in, rather than kind of doing a roadshow with this one, because it's kind of a smaller tactical zoning amendment. But I think we can definitely do that. We have places where we can get onto agendas and talk to people about it and get some feedback.
Okay. And the 100 and 500 foot draft, what was the basis of picking those distances?
I'd have to go back and I can go back and look and get you a full answer, but I'm pretty sure those are the numbers they use in Wilmington. So we just pulled those completely right now from there.
Okay. Any thought about treating a sound wall not as a measured in height, width, and depth, but rather as a decibel reduction device? So put up whatever you want, as long as it doesn't exceed some other zoning standard that I don't know about. But if you're only going to be 100 feet from a residential zoning thing, you should knock 6 dB down or 4 dB or something along those lines, because I can imagine all kinds of dense vegetation that would be really good at knocking sound out, and others that would be totally useless at knocking sound out.
Yeah, for the wall, we are one of the needs we've identified as staff is to define a little better than we have so far, or a little better than the definitions we pulled from elsewhere. I don't know if it can be as simple as just saying the wall must create this amount of decibel reduction. Maybe can look into that, but definitely it needs more definition. And I think that's a good comment, and I'll take that to heart as we try to find a better definition for it.
And then just one final recommendation, and maybe I'm just too paranoid about some of the complaints I've heard from people, but the pictures imply that the residential district is only one direction away from the source. But take, for example, the Grove Park Inn. If they rock up a band for weddings night after night, they're literally surrounded on 3 sides by residential districts. It's this little commercial district right in the middle of residential ones. Same thing with the amphitheater up in Montford. So when we're trying to communicate this and we're thinking about ramifications, you just got to think of whether it's going to really look this way, and whether it's going to be practical to the venue owner to pointing their speakers away is good advice, but sound bounces and it goes in all directions and all that kind of stuff. So I just don't want to imply that that's just going to take care of the problem, because all the pictures show that the speakers are pointed away from the residential district. I'm done.
Sure. Thanks for that. Yeah, this is a very, these exhibits live in a two-dimensional world. So, yeah.
And I'll get to Jeff in just a second. And I just want to add, one of the things that we talked about in the past with creating this noise advisory board is to be a resource for the city for these sort of things. I mean, because we know we do have a wealth of knowledge of people in the industry of sound in engineering. And so we can help to work these things out. And that's one of the things we talked about. So, anything that we can do through us as a board, but also as somebody in the industry is, we're here to help figure these things out ahead of time. Jeff, your question.
Yes. Well, Chris, will there be any development or building standards in consideration? For example, building the apartments near a performance space, triple pane windows, whatever it is that needs to be part of a development, not just because of the performance space, but also because of the fact it's in the central business district. Is there more thought on that, and will there be any kind of standards where that's concerned?
So going back I think to the earlier question, was in the same realm. It's interesting to hear, thinking about those buildings, that the non-outdoor performance venue buildings that go into those areas where they already are. I don't know. We haven't really given that much thought, but we will now, certainly, because that's what we've heard from y'all today. One of the things we've heard. My reason I say I don't know is I got to figure out how we would look at a standard like that. I've just there's some technical issues in my head, ordinance issues I have to think through to see if there's anything that could be done there.
And you're meaning in terms of the actual apartments or residents being built? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Whether limiting their placement or adding additional standards that say you need to do sound attenuation in your construction or something like that. Those are kind of uncharted territories for me in zoning. So I kind of have to say, hey, legal department, can we do this stuff?
Right.
Before we even go too far down that path. But I'm definitely hearing that. So we'll do that. We will check into that and see what it looks like.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, all right. Thank you, Chris, so much for that information. So staying on track, we're going to move on to new business, and we're going to talk about the logging, tracking, and investigating of noise complaints. We're going to hear from Daniel and Granier on that.
Sure. Thank you, Jessica. We had sent this out with, I know we had talked a little bit about it. Rick had asked in the last meeting, just that, we were talking through how we did this, but he would like to see a little bit, just so, there was something more in a policy form. So we sent this out with the agenda. It is our internal process. The purpose of it was to really try and maintain consistency and fairness in how we respond to every noise complaint, because every noise complaint is unique. Some of them are, some of them can be addressed easily. Some of them are really complex. And so the purpose of having this internal document was so that we as staff could really adhere to a fairness and equity and consistency, so that all parties are, kind of in the loop while we work through these issues. So we have a complainant, we're going to contact the complainant. We're also going to contact the noisemaker, so that, everybody is aware of what's going on. It really just goes through, and I don't know, I don't think there's any need for me to go through it. I'm happy to field any questions you would have. It really just goes through how we look at a complaint, whether we can determine this is something that is within our jurisdiction, or whether it's something that maybe if it's a barking dog, it would go to animal services, or it would, if it's, middle of the night work on Merriman Avenue, that would be a DOT concern that would be exempt under our current ordinance. But we still like to act on behalf of the complainant in that regard, and at least be able to reach out to DOT. We're not just going to go to the complainant and say this this is exempt from our ordinance. We'll still try and get them that information as a public service and get them some dates as to when a project might be finishing. So those are really how we look at them. Some of them may need to go to alcohol law enforcement, and some of them are in the county. So those are the kind of things we look at initially when we've read the complaint. We'll double check the address, see if it's in our jurisdiction, and then continue the process from there. So I don't really feel, if everybody's had an opportunity to read it, I don't feel the need to go through it line by line, but we're happy to answer any questions you have or comments or anything you need any clarification on.
Granier, this is Charles. Question for you, and this leaks a little bit from what you just talked about into what I guess is upcoming about the CSV data file, because I took the data file and I did some perusing and manipulation of it and grouped and clustered some things. So one of the things that struck me as I looked at it in the context of your flowchart and process handling, when you find someone and engage them, it would be helpful, I think, to know, what was recommended. I think in your sample letter, it talked about aiming speakers to the middle of the venue to cut down on the radiant noise.
Correct.
And then in addition to having that as a comment or whatever, whether or not it recurred to determine did they violate a second time. Because I think what that tells me is where do we have chronic violation,
right,
that might cause us to go back and take a little bit more stringent dialogue with the particular offender. So if that could be added, I think it would be helpful, because that way it puts a little bit of understanding and depth into your statistics.
I think, Charlie, that's a great comment. And I think, honestly, in a lot of what you're saying is actually in our notes. And those we are a little, we're a little more protective of, because there's some things in there that are pertinent to the investigation, but also just conversational things. But those things are certainly captured. Like in the case that we sent you, there wasn't a violation in that case. We still made a best practice recommendation with that venue operator to cut down on the noise, but actually and that's an acknowledgement that although they were completely in compliance with the DB levels for the zoning district, we're still trying to mitigate a little bit with them. And I think that's where everything comes in and goodwill on their part too. So what we would do in that case is certainly keep our notes there. If we close that, if that complainant comes back to us again, we will certainly be able to go back and say, look, these are the recommendations we made to you in good faith to work with your neighbors and with the neighborhood to mitigate the noise, although you were actually well within compliance for the decibel limits. So we can certainly look at that. I think the notes that we keep, Charlie, is a big portion of that. This is the process. The notes are the sort of meat and gravy of what we do with an investigation at any given moment.
Right. And I think what kind of triggered me in that thought process, Granier, is that when I looked at grouping together the complaints, and not to pick on Salvage Station, but I noticed that 70% of the closure codes on them were education. So my question was, well, how much education do you have to educate those people over before they stop? And that's why having a little bit more of what did you recommend to them? Did they do it? And if they didn't do it, why are we having to go back and re-educate and re-educate and re-educate? I mean, at some point, they just are ignoring you.
Are you asking about educating the Salvage Station or the complainants?
What I saw in the CSV data sheet was that when I grouped them together and looked at Salvage Station, the only thing on there are the closure codes. I'm asking for a little bit more detailed understanding of what went on behind that to reach closure. Did you tell them to do X? And
no,
did they
so
do it? Yes or no?
No, so in that case, they were actually in compliance on the evenings that we were on site, and there was no violation, and that's where the education went back. But all those complainants were emailed collectively, Charlie, when we took those readings, and at that on the evenings that those readings were taken, there was no violation.
But those spanned from, it looks like September into November. I mean, were you on site every one of those times?
No, I know we were not on site every one of those times. Again,
Grenier, all I'm asking is that I'd just like a little bit more detailed understanding of what we told them and did they comply or not.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
And Charlie, just so you know, that is exactly what we're gonna get into next. And so what we wanted to do is, once we got through this, is have a discussion as a board of looking at this CVS data file. What information are we going to ask as a board from the DSD department, right? So that's part of what we're going to get in for a discussion, because I completely understand and I agree with you. And that's part of what we're trying to understand, because doing my own research of this, I cross-referenced a number of those days, and there's a number of them where those complaints came in where they didn't even have a show. And so I wanted to know the same thing, is like, how is this going forward? Because theoretically, there's also calls getting made that have nothing, that are getting referenced to the salvage station that weren't on days that they actually had shows. So we want to figure that out, from both sides. So, so I'm with you. We're definitely going to get into that in just a
sorry, I didn't mean to get the cart before
No,
the
it's
horse,
all right.
but,
Hey, I mean, we're just keeping it
details.
going. We're just keeping it going. Corbin, you have your hand raised. What's your question? You have to unmute yourself.
Is it going?
Corbin? No? All right, maybe we'll come back to him in just a minute. Anyone else? Any other questions right now before Grenier moves on? Oh,
Are you there?
There you go.
Okay,
Sorry about that. I couldn't get my phone to work with me. No, in reference to an example of the salvage station, I kind of wouldn't mind giving my my viewpoint from so Charlie can maybe get a better understanding. I think I kind of see where he's coming from. So like with me, for instance, with my venue, I've gotten multiple complaints in the past, and the things that I've done, which are obviously in the notes, but maybe not public knowledge, is that like noise canceling curtains, sound preventing foam insulation over the windows, restructuring of my stage and sound system completely. I also closed up my patio, sealed it up with foliage to help prevent things like this. So there's a lot of steps that I've taken, and I'm well under the decibel level, but I'm still going to get complaints. Just like the salvage station is still going to get complaints. I mean, I myself have gotten complaints on days that I've been closed. So I don't know if, I think if we all, the board has a file on, or not the board, but, Ben and everybody has a file for everybody, and that particular information is in there, but that's a lot of information to be put out to the public, and I don't know if it's necessary. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on it. I mean, as long as you guys were out there and you did your readings, and I just don't think everything needs to be in the out of respect for other business owners and such. Maybe everything doesn't need to be in the file, or for public knowledge rather. Sorry.
Completely heard, Corbin, and that's, again, we'll get more into that discussion of that, and finding what's the right amount of us as a board relying on Daniel and Grenier to give to us that, and bringing things to our attention when it's something that needs to be brought to our attention, versus putting all of this information out there. And of course, there are other concerns too with them doing that. So we're basically going to try and hopefully open that discussion to find that balance today. Rick?
Thanks. So I went through sort of the flow chart, and I wrote down questions as I was thinking through these things. So I apologize in advance if my questions are hard to track. If we need to go, if you need me to trace it back to a particular thing, just say so, and I'll do that for the next session. So the first thing I noted, I'm still just really worried that APD forwarded complaints, that they just end up closed and we don't end up knowing why or how. And so if you want, Jessica, we can defer that to the data discussion, but so many of the complaints that are coming in are being handled by APD. And I get that you guys get all these notes, but I don't think the board has access to what those notes amount to. And so it's such a large percentage of the complaints that I just feel blind to that one. There's a bunch of decision points in the flow chart that could have some definition behind them. So for example, there's a decision point that says, is a possible violation present? You know, that, I don't know what that means. You know, it's vague. So it would be good to describe that in more detail. And I don't think it's rock solid. I think as you learn, it's going to change. So I think it would be good if that was defined a little bit better. It kind of comes back to something that Charlie said. There's this monitor for future complaints. It's not, I think what you're saying is, if you ever get another complaint that seems to be aimed at that noisemaker, then that might drive action. Not that there's any other proactive action you guys are doing, like going back to that vicinity again and trying to determine what the noise source is. I just think we need to be clear on what monitor for future complaints, if that's the most effective method for getting to the bottom of a noisemaker, especially since sometimes if the noise source is in the middle of the night, it's 12 or 14 hours later before you can do a visit, right? That just, you know, makes me nervous a little bit.
Well, Rick, let me answer a few things of what you've asked. First, the flow chart, we edited this flow chart by like 20 times because it was almost like we needed a flow chart for the flow chart for the next flow chart, because there was so much detail to the point that it took a team of us to actually reduce it to minimal amount of words, because it's a flow chart. So we're not trying to be so specific that you're going to drown somebody with a 4-page flow chart. So this was, thank you, Haley, and I believe Chris as well helped for trying to reduce all this to actually an 8x10 page, which was very difficult to do. So for example, this is the most recent thing off the top of my head, what you mentioned about monitoring for future. I'll give you an example. We had an industrial location where we received complaints that this industrial place was making too much noise, or their fans, or what the case was. We actually did go out. We actually closed it out. We took our readings during the times that they said. It was late night, cold, whatever the situation. We closed it out. But when we're putting in monitor for future situations, just so happens that since we ride around town all day and night, even on the weekend, we were out Saturday night, I can actually be going home. And on the way home, I'm actually texting Grania, saying, hey, I'm by ABC Industrial. I'm actually just going to swing by there to see if something's going on, because it might be in that rare location when the complainant says, oh, it happens all the time, every day. And then my first question to that complainant is, so you mean if I get in my car right now, it's happening right now? Well, not right now. I'll say, well, then it's not all the time, every day. So a lot of times we've already closed the case because we've gone out, we've spoken to the complainant, we've either made contact with the alleged noisemaker, we've taken our readings, we've closed it out, we've been there 10 times, but it just so happens that we're gonna keep monitoring because I'm on my way home. You know what?
Yeah.
It is just 2 minutes away. I'm literally texting Rania. I said, I'm near ABC Industrial. I'm just gonna swing by really quick. And those notes will add, hey, even though we closed this out, I stopped by there Tuesday night, February, whatever, and there was no noise seen or heard or activity from the location. So in that sense, that's what we mean by monitoring.
Yeah.
Not like saying, hey, this bar is really loud. Okay, don't worry, we're just gonna monitor it.
Yeah.
That's not that way.
Yeah.
So if we do need to clarify that on the flow chart where it says monitoring, we can do that. But just so you know, we've been trying to condense the words as much as possible so it's actually a legible flow chart.
Yeah.
And not a 4-page, which is kind of what we started
Well,
with.
and really the text kind of is designed to be a little bit more detailed to go with it. But I see exactly what you're saying, Rick, and you know, to that point, exactly what Daniel said, that you know, you might just stop by and just take a reading. There is also a really fine balance when we find something's not, when something is in compliance, and we will still receive, we will still have a complainant saying, well, it's still really loud, you need to come out maybe tonight. It's not, it's really, that's a really hard balance to strike, to be able to get out and do that on a routine basis. Given that could be something that could go on for the next 6 months, that there's going to be, you know, activity at that property 5 nights a week. It's very hard for us to be able to get out there 4 nights of those week. We might be able to go 1 night a week. But I think that I agree with you that monitoring is really important. Being able to monitor lots of things, lots of the time is really where the challenge is in that one.
So let me clarify one thing, because I know I just didn't say it. When I had a question in the flow chart, because it was a great introductory document, don't make it bigger.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it the way it is. So
you should have seen the original.
Yeah.
So then I went to the policy to see if I could get the answer to my question in the policy.
Gotcha.
And if I got my answer to the question, I didn't write it down because then if I was satisfied with it. So I'm not encouraging you to make it bigger.
Right.
And I'm also trying to be realistic about the learning curve we're all in, and that you don't want to rewrite a policy every single day that you learn something new. But if you can, I think it's just best practice for whoever takes Grania's job somewhere along the way, or the next Daniel that joins the team, or whatever it is. The criteria you're using for some of these decisions could just be captured in the policy document, and
Sure.
And you can modify that as often as you want, because you don't have to go to the city council for policy improvements.
Absolutely.
And one of the things we did discuss is and the reason everyone got this ahead of time, and it's, you know, it was short time, but we have time to work on it, is to really look at it and trying to follow the way we handle something. So if something is not clear, something does sound right, that gives us that opportunity to edit it and say, okay, we assume you'll understand it because we do this every day.
Yeah.
But that's a bad assumption, knowing that you would understand it, because there's something that could be unclear that we can easily either put in a little more detail or just to explain it a little more. So if everybody on the board is clear with what we're doing on these policies, then we can move forward versus assuming that you know, and that's not fair to you.
So Rick, exactly, but just so I can make some notes on this, what did you want us just to elaborate a little bit more on what that monitoring meant? Just sort of delineate it a little bit more, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just, it sounds like you're doing some proactive monitoring, but the way it reads in the policy is you'd be waiting for another complaint.
Right,
And
and thank you for bringing that up, because I guess in a lot of ways it could be both, right? We would, proactive is a big thing for us. We try and get out ahead of things just because we have other limitations. But obviously if we're doing proactive, we would also do reactive if somebody complains. So yeah, we can certainly pop in a couple of sentences that brings that a little bit clearer into focus. And And thank you for bringing that up, because like Daniel said, we do this every day. So we're making, we're maybe making assumptions that other people might not, because they're not in it every day. So we can certainly pop in a couple of sentences to say that monitoring can be either proactive or reactive based on receipt of an additional complaint. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Thank you.
And then to also answer the APD comment, the question that came in regarding why those calls are closed out, there are situations where we embrace, and we're super happy that even though APD doesn't normally respond to noise complaints, when they do receive them, there are calls that are completely, if it has an APD closure code, that means we did nothing for that. APD responded. We're talking, some of these things are underage drinking, fights in parking lots. There was noise that was produced by some sort of activity. Sometimes they call in saying they're selling drugs and they have guns. These are things that are so out of the scope of what we do. So if it has an APD closure code on it, it's because APD did handle that. Another situation would be, we don't have a name, we don't have a phone number, but somehow APD responded and they couldn't find the noisemaker, or what was they called? They couldn't find the suspect. So we're stuck. We don't have a name. A lot of times we have a block, like in the 1500 block of Main Street. So we have such limited information, we can't follow up with that. So we do give that credit where it's due and give it to APD. But the most important part is in situations where, I think it was last month while we were in the meeting, that same day or the night before, somebody actually called in a noise complaint because there was a party, but it turned out into a shootout.
Yeah.
So it was one of those situations like, yeah, we're not taking any credit for anything. We are giving that to APD, and that is closed. APD might give us a call that they said, hey, we closed this out, the party was over, and we're all good. If we have a name and a phone number, we actually follow up with that person with saying, hey, we know APD showed up. There was a lot of, maybe there was a fight or a brawl, you did the right thing. Has this happened before? Where do you live? Sometimes these are apartment complexes that we might not have ever called. And then we start that right back to where we were in the beginning. Have you talked to your property manager? We talked to the property manager. Has there ever been issues with that apartment? Because we're seeing it came in through APD. So even though they closed it, that doesn't mean we have to. But there are situations where we do have to close APD. We don't take credit for the work they've done. Or it's situations that's just dangerous, that it's not for us to be in there. We have one example of a residential place where we actually got in touch. We had a meeting with APD because this place kept coming up chronically up. APD specifically told us, do not go knock on that door. You will get shot. And we were like, oh, okay, they're handling it. Noise is a byproduct of other things that are going on in that place. And the last place we need to go is like, hi, I'm with the city. Lower the saw in the saw noise in your garage. Yeah, it goes beyond saw noise. The PD specifically told us, do not go knocking on that door. You will be shot. So
let me get a word in edgewise. Two things. First, Jessica, this could go on for quite some time. If you think we're going to get in trouble with the rest of our agenda, just stop me. Okay, because I've only got to like 4 of 14 questions that I wrote down, and we can carry this forward as incomplete business into the next time. So on the APD thing, maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. I just want to know what they did, and I don't really get this whole who's giving credit to who stuff. That, to me as a board member, it's irrelevant. There's enforcement. You guys do enforcement. APD does enforcement. Are we getting enough data from APD so that when we are no longer paying attention to a complaint, we have a reasonable understanding of how that complaint was closed, so that we have confidence that we can judge how the ordinance is working, and whether the complainant is satisfied and all that sort of stuff. So that's the way it looks in the policy is for very good reasons, it's too dangerous of a situation or there's some history there, you guys shouldn't go.
Right.
APD is our enforcement agency, as far as I'm concerned, from this board at that time, and we have to hold them accountable somehow to provide information so we know whether the ordinance is working or not. That's the only thing there. So I think what would be best, given that it's almost 2:30, is let me just table the rest of these questions. Maybe a bunch of them will get answered in the data section.
Okay. Cool.
I think that's a good idea, and and it's also tied to this information, and you know that your questions are tied to the data and information. And I was thinking about it from this perspective of what we've talked about in the past, and wanting to know how these things are closed out. But also, I think what's important for us as a board is to look at, as we think about the data and information that we need from whether that's the police department or DSD, that we look at, you know, what's the end, like what's the information we need to be effective and efficient for what our mission is. Because perfect example is I stayed downtown one day last week and there was a person that was screaming and making a bunch of noise in the middle of the night and woke me up and woke my friend up. And, you know, that was a situation that obviously was taken care of. The police came, but that was like a one and done situation. So in regards of what we're trying to do, there's, you know, that was a one-time situation. What are the, you know, there's not very much us as a board that we can do there. Looking at how to mitigate situations like we've talked about in the past with Kenilworth residents or, you know, habitual offenders seems to be something that needs to be definitely more of where our emphasis is. And I just say that to everyone as we look at the information that we need. So I don't know if we necessarily need to have every single case that's been closed out and have that information. And even if that's efficient for us to even ask for from the city. So I just put that out there as food for thought as we have that discussion of what do we think we need as a board information wise, looking at that CSV file, that's going to help us to be most effective to make sure that this ordinance is working. Any thoughts? Rick, I know you got some thoughts.
No, I was trying to give you the head bob that I agree.
So yeah, I mean, you know, as I've been looking at this, at all of these different ways of just going, what do we really need in order to make sure that we're making sure that this is enforced? And because as a board, I don't feel like we need that information of what happened to me last week staying downtown, because that happened, you know, I asked my friend, I was like, does this happen all the time? And he's like, no, not all the time, but from time to time it happens, but it usually, you know, it gets resolved as part of living downtown. And I think that's a difference between something that's repetitive, that's keeping, you know, me up every night. So, and then there's of course everywhere in between, right? So it's just like, what's the information that we need? And looking at the information that has been presented to us, for instance, for today, you know, we can look at, I mean, that's my question to everybody is like, what do we need that's already on here? Because I feel like knowing what information, having to go back and continually looking at the closed code and where things are, right, is like, well, which of these is there a way to know which one of these are habitual? Because you do see some of the same information, but also on the flip side, being respectful of people's personal, you know, information or business information. It's just like, if it's been taken care of, is it information that, you know, we're told internally as a board and isn't necessarily also, you know, shared to the public? So, I don't know. I think this is going to be another one of those things that we're going to continually look at. And as we get information, go, okay, we actually don't need all of this. Or, you know what we're not getting this is what we need. So I think, for instance, one of the things is knowing if there's a way for us to know when there's habitual offenders, that we have a way of knowing how that's tracked. And that's whether it's highlighted or different color or something of that sort. Again, Haley, not trying to make any more work for anybody, because I already know that this is a bunch of work that's already been, taking all the personal information out of here. So trying to be respectful of people's time while also being able to do what we can do. Ben, did you want to say something? Is that why? Turn your camera on.
I'm going to, but I'll wait and see if any board members have comments or questions first.
Jessica, I would just respond saying that, these are statistics, and statistics to me are looking for trends and clusters. So I think to your point about not getting too evolved down into the minutia, if we can pick out from this information, where are the top 5 clusters of problems that we want to go after in more definitive terms to see if we can help advise on how to mitigate. So that was my only thought. I mean, if they're capturing the detail as a document linked to this incident record, that would be wonderful, if anybody wanted to go do that kind of research. But for me, I look at these statistics beyond the face of them and say, where do I see the top 5 chronic offenders? And why does it keep happening over and over and over again? That would be where I would want to spend my time.
So to looking at this information that we have here, how does everyone feel about where we have the dates, whether or not it's residential neighborhood, public space, unknown, industrial, date, time, where the complaint came in from, whether that's APD, jot form, phone call, email, and then whether or what the closing code was or complaint receipt confirmed. How does the board feel in terms of, does this seem like the information that we need right now to continue, like Charlie said, to keep seeing these trends? Or is there something else that we need that's not in this document? Ben?
Charlie, I want to say something before I lose it. So this CSV that we sent, it has the top 15 complaint locations. It's literally on that spreadsheet. So right to the right of the column. So we've already identified the areas, the specific locations that are the hotspots, so to speak. So that's on this table. The one caveat I would give, and this is really important, that's the top 15 places that we get complaints on. It doesn't mean they're violating the noise ordinance. So just remember that this data is complaint data, so it doesn't necessarily correlate to a noise ordinance issue. Now, sometimes it will, but sometimes it doesn't. The other piece that I think Charlie would also kind of help with what you're asking, maybe this is a better way to do this. Chris is working on creating a mapping function for this. So hopefully within the next month, not only can you see this big CSV, but there should be a GIS mapping function, like a heat map, so you could also kind of see spatially where these noise complaints are greatest.
Right, and I think you're headed exactly where I was, Ben. But I'll give you for instance, I would want to dig one level deeper and say, okay, trash collection. I seriously doubt we're going to stop trash collection in the city. So do I want to break my pick on getting all Wanner and Axel about picking up trash at 5 a.m? I mean, I drink coffee and listen to it every morning. So what? But I think my only point about, whether it's locationally or whether it is some other systemic marker that we put on it, I'm just saying, rather than try to boil the ocean, let's get her down to a small lake or pond and figure out what we want to do. Because we'll be judged by our outcome. If we spend 6 months or 8 months or 9 months and we don't have an outcome, then we'll be one of the 16 boards they get rid of in favor of the 4 they claim they want to go down to at the city level. So.
Charlie, will you make sure to mute yourself when you're not talking, because we hear the feedback from your external speakers.
Okay.
Thank you. Jeff, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of second what Ben was saying about that data is it is just complaint data, and I think it's really important that we understand the legitimacy of all those complaints, whether someone is in violation or not in violation. So that's important data for us to have.
Agreed. Any other questions? I mean, I feel like this information that we're getting is, and especially with when you scroll all the way over and you see the complaint type. Thanks, Ben, for that. Missed that part when I was planning for this. I think that this is really good information so far. I think that it, again, like I said, this may change as we go on, as we start seeing these trends, and if we decide that we may need some information. But right now, this feels pretty good to me personally. What about everybody else? Is there anything that we feel is missing from this information right now? No? Okay. Rick?
We're going to handle decibels in the next section.
Yep. Yeah.
Jessica, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one last thing. I do think that what would help, I think I hear what you're saying, Charlie. Trash is a good example. So we know there's 32 trash complaints, right? But we don't know where they are. It could all be the same apartment complex 32 times, and every one of those could have been. So I do wonder if having like a GIS mapping function. So we got to be careful with personal identifying information. We're not trying to give people's phone numbers and email addresses over, the city website that are complaining, because they have a right to privacy when they file a complaint. But I wonder, Charlie, if the GIS was set up in a way where you could maybe select trash complaints, right? You could choose that layer, and then that would display for you spatially. So then you could see, is there, are these 32 separate and just random trash complaints, or 30 of these at the same place? So I wonder if the spatial element, the GIS function, would help maybe with the board, maybe help you where you're trying to get with kind of understanding this. Do you think that's something you'd want to see, or?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, because what it would help is either to discount or include what you want to look at, and then you go a little bit deeper if you find something that's a bothersome trend, and say, well, I would like to know a little bit more detail about this shorter list. So yeah, the mapping location is going to be critical, and then the type, I think, is a good place to start.
In full caveat, we're still trying to figure that out, because there's some complaints that come in, for example, that don't have an address. So there's nowhere to map that complaint. So we just got some tech issues we're working through, but I do think that'll help to be able to see the data that way, because it's a lot. Everything you want here is just really difficult to sort through it unless you're like a master at a spreadsheet, which I am not. So.
Agreed. And also, I mean, the same thing is like when we look at the top 15 and we see residents West Asheville, being able to know and look at a map and see if those are clustered in the same area. And then again, they're just complaints. And then decipher down and whether or not see what those complaints are and how they were closed out, if it's something that is indeed an issue, because all we're seeing is those numbers of complaints being made. Which is interesting when you look at this and you see public space, or you see this one apartment complex, and that seems, maybe extraordinarily high for one place, until you look at and see how big that place is versus, where that cluster is for one of the other residential neighborhoods. So, yeah, and then that's where we can sort of get into the nitty gritty and more information that we need, because just to reiterate, just because there's a complaint doesn't mean there's necessarily an issue there. That could be two people that have problems with each other, just calling calling complaints in on each other. And so we as a board have no idea if we would know that. And then, being able to rely on you all to say, yes, there's a feud going on, that's all you need to know. We're taking care of it. Yeah. It's being addressed.
And you're exactly right. Those do pop up, Jessica, where the statistic does not tell the story. And, that's why our notes are very detailed and they do give a lot of information, but there's a little bit of, maybe too much information in some of the notes that we keep. So, yeah, but certainly we can absolutely elaborate on them without a doubt for you, for sure.
Well, I think it sounds like we're all in agreement as because I want to make sure that we give time to Rick for decibels before we get to comments so that we can, because I know that's something he wants to talk about in terms of information gathered.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we're all in agreement right now that as of right now, the information that we are getting from these reports is adequate. Is that a correct statement to the board? Do you all feel that way?
Yeah, we can work with it.
I still feel short on the APD handled calls.
Okay.
And I don't feel smart enough now to make any kind of a recommendation, but I just filtered the whole thing on just the ones that are handled by APD, and they're all over the place, and a ton of them are unknown. Where the noise source is, so that tells me it doesn't tell me enough. It could be that these are all one-offs, but making that guess just seems not appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish. And I remember during the discussions with APD before the noise ordinance was revised, there was a lot of debate about what information would come over to DSD. And I know Grania and Daniel said that APD is getting better and better at their notes, but it's two different data systems. And I think that's causing us a problem on 1/4 of the complaints that we've got, where we really don't know what they did from this data.
Corbin, you had your hand up.
My phone. Yeah. So, I was just going to say, we are leaving a little margin, a buffer zone for error, right? We are leaving that. We know that not every complaint is going to be realized, so to speak. Like, for instance, the police were here on Haywood Road the other day. It was pretty quiet on Haywood Road, but some guys had come through with a 4-wheeler or something, riding up and down the street, and it only lasted for about 10 minutes, but it was late. And the police came, and they were all over the place looking for it, but they didn't know who called, and they didn't know exactly whereabouts it was, and they didn't get there till 20 minutes later. So I don't know how much more information they could give us, because they really didn't even know. And I didn't even figure out what the noise was until, a day later when I saw somebody who saw them. So there's a lot of room for error and dismissal. I just think that, we can't forget about that as well, because we got a lot to handle. And the police might be coming from a domestic dispute that's crazy, and they come over to look for a noise, and they really just don't care to put in any extra notes. That might just be the case. I only say that because I've talked to cops who just turn it down and they walk off. They don't care. I just for the benefit of the other person and also for our own sanity, just remember that there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions with these complaints, especially coming from the APD, as short-staffed as they are. So I just want to put that out there.
Heard. And I think you're right. I think we're going to continue to have to just figure that out and what that information looks like, and see again if some trends come up from, like, just stating my own experience from last week of just hopefully if there's something that is a reoccurring issue and problem with the way APD is handling some of these calls, hopefully those folks that are experiencing that will reach out in some other form or fashion, whether it's through, attending one of these meetings and watching and commenting, or reaching out to DSD and making their complaints known in other ways. So it's hard to say, but again, as we're gathering this data and And, like Charlie said, looking at these trends, it's hard to say what that information is from APD. It's like every other part of this, just going to continue to be a learning experience, try and get the right information and what we need to be the most efficient, but we're not going to hit it all, and I think that's just being fair to ourselves as being a new board, doing the best we can to figure this out. And some things are unfortunately going to fall through the cracks. We'll just do our best to make sure that it's the least amount possible.
Right.
So if there's no other questions or comments in terms of the information, let's move on to decibel levels, and I'll turn it over to you, Rick. So hopefully we can hit our mark on that and then get to public comment.
Yeah, so when Jessica and I were going through the mission statement, there's the thing about reduction of noise. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that a lot of debate was had during the construction of the noise ordinance about decibel levels. But when it is the kind of complaint where decibel reading is the determinator, we're not getting that data, and I think we need it. That it was from a commercial source. It was complaint came from the resident. The resident said, this is too loud. We get there at some point. We judge whether we're getting a measurement that is representative of the nature of the complaint. It seems like we need to be including the measurements that we take to see if on one side of the coin that residents are complaining about things that are not complaints from an ordinance perspective. That's still a problem, I believe, that the board has to handle, right? Either we're inadequately educating the public about what the standards are, or the public is dissatisfied with the noise levels that the ordinance permits. So without decibel readings, when they're taken associated with the complaint, I don't think we can do our job. So that was my reason for putting this in here. I know that, like all the APD ones, for example, they won't be taking decibel readings. So it'll only be the commercial to residential or industrial to residential ones. So there'll only be a subset of this massive list where decibel readings are even pertinent. So there's my argument for including it. Any thoughts from anybody?
Rick, I think one thing that I believe your point that you just made kind of zeroes in on is that even if someone goes, let's say DSD, checks something out as they did, I'll use their noise proactive complaint, and they measured to 61 decibels, which is currently in compliance. If we're going to study and assess enforcement, if it is still problematic to the population that they're going to complain about it at 61.9 or 62, then we're back to, are the decibel levels too high? So I echo what you were articulating, is that, yeah, we need to know or understand better. Just because the limits were set where they were set, are they the right limits, depending on these maps that we'll talk about and where they are and how clustered the population is residentially around, various, noise sources. So I agree with you.
So that's fine. We're happy to share decibels with you. Let me take this off. So do you want that in a similar format as the other data that you have? I don't know if we can go in and actually put decibel levels on the ones that apply, but we can certainly give you all our decibel levels. I don't have any issues with that at all. Might be a little bit of cross-referencing, but is that the kind of format you're looking for? The same, just time, date, when you did it, all that stuff?
Thanks for asking, Grania. I had not considered what format. The only other thing I thought was, time is really important. I think we all know we have a challenge with, I'm hearing this really loud thing at 2:15 in the morning, and APD doesn't measure anything, and you guys follow up and do a great job, but you're not out there at 2:15 in the morning. And so just seeing the separation between the complaint time and the actual measurement, I think is helpful in us understanding how effective we can be.
Sure.
If this is just a separate table, but some way able to reference it to the big table, I leave that up to you.
Okay, we'll have to have a look at it. I know there are two separate documents right now. I don't know if there's a way for us to be able to cross-reference that. I would say also, Rick, that if we know that there's something routinely happening at 2:00 in the morning, Daniel and I we will schedule ourselves to be able to be out there so we can capture that as accurately as we can. That's a challenge for us because some of these things are so random that and this is one of the reasons why we kind of worked a little bit with the proactive stuff, because it gives us an opportunity to say to the complainant, we're taking you seriously, we're trying to resolve this. It gives us an opportunity to the venue owner to say, this is a complaint we're trying to follow up on, we're trying to work with you, and we're bringing the good faith into that. But if we can tell Rick that something's happening at 2:15 every Monday morning, we will absolutely schedule time to do that, because I agree with you. It's really important to capture the complaint, not a proxy of the complaint or an approximate of it. So we can certainly do that. I'll have to see with the data whether we can cross-reference them for you or not. I mean, we can to some extent, but there's a lot in the decibel log. I'm happy for you to have all of it, for sure.
And if the historical stuff can't cross-reference, but you can make just minor changes to your current policy so that the go-forward stuff cross-references easily.
I'll have to look into that. I don't know, because they're two different systems. I honestly would love to answer you definitively right now, but I don't know. But we will certainly let you guys know if there's a way for us to be able to do that.
Okay.
Ben, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe just not to belabor us, Rick. I mean, that is a good question. And I do think I think that's really important that this board sees decibel levels to know if they're set correctly, because y'all remember there was a lot of debate over what should or shouldn't be the decibel level. So I think that's really valid. I'm with Grania. They may have to be separate spreadsheets, and we'll have to do our best. For example, say like on a Saturday night, since y'all brought it up earlier, say Salvage Station's got a concert, we get 10 complaints. We're probably not going to measure that concert that Saturday night. We're probably not going to have a decibel reading. We may, but we probably won't. But the thing about like commercial noise, a thing subject to the decibel, it's really predictable. It really is. Like, I know every night that Salvage Station has a concert. I know every night that Rabbit Rabbit does. And so it's actually what we can do is we look at the schedule for those venues, and we'll just find a night they have a big band there and go out, for example. Or if it's industrial, we know when they run the refrigeration units or whatever. So I will say, like, we don't always catch commercial noise in the moment, but it's a pretty predictable, like, noise complaint to address. And we can probably get that information to you. So I may not be at Salvage Station the night the complaint comes in. They've probably got 3 more concerts scheduled that week, and we'll catch one of those. I guess, does that make sense? Like, I don't think it's hard to get you that information. It's just the correlation might be a little bit challenging.
Yeah. I would also add to all the board members that I hope you will trust in staff bringing that to you also, because I think we've been really limited with commercial decibel levels since the ordinance went into place, just being at the time of year that it happened. I think we'll have a lot more data on that by the end of the summer. But I also think that just us being in the field is going to be a resource to the board to say, you know what, X is just too loud for that zoning district. Or, it's going to be a combination of what you see, but also by by how we're responding to the number of complaints and what numbers of complaints we're getting in different zoning districts, I think staff is going to be able to really come to the board and say this needs to change because it's just not sustainable or it's just not enforceable. So I think, you know, the decibel levels plus the experience of administering and working the ordinance through the next several months will both bring a lot more information to as to the effectiveness of where it's really effective in some places and where it's really challenging in others. Because it's certainly, I would say, just to kind of finish this out, it's not a flat ordinance. There's so many different, like Charlie's talking about trash, we're talking about music, we're talking about residential neighbors, we're talking about so many different disciplines within that they're I think as staff we will say, you know, we think these components of the ordinance are really effective. They're really easy for us to enforce, or not easy for us to enforce, but definite for us to enforce. And these are the parts that are challenging. And for certain, you know, there'll need to be a little bit of adjustment as we go along. But I hope the decibel levels plus staff's own experience will be able to really paint a good picture for you as a board, you know, as time goes on. Great.
Just one recommendation, don't feel the need to respond to it now. I keep on thinking about this problem of the measurements say that the noisemaker is in compliance. So there's no official, you know, there's no warning, there's nothing like that. And the complainant is actually willing to talk to you, right? So that example, how do we collect the impact that the complainant is having that caused them to call you, right? If it's not a matter of, oh, I didn't know 67 decibels were allowed in the CBD at this point in time and day. Oh, sorry, if I'd known that, I never would have called you.
Right.
If the conversation is like, it's waking my kid up, or I can't listen to TV, or I wonder, even though there's no limit imposed by the ordinance, I wonder if it wouldn't be helpful in the long term to take measurements of what you were hearing inside the location of the complainant, just as a data point, right? So we'll take Charlie's case. You know, Rabbit fires it up. They're running at 84.9 decibels as measured at all the places there, but he can't carry on a conversation in his house because the nature of the topology is he's getting 79 decibels inside his apartment with his triple pane windows closed. That would be pretty valuable to know as we try to judge why we're getting all these complaints, but the measurements made in the most effective way at the source, or, you know, on the outdoor patio, are showing that people are in compliance. It might be more useful than just the anecdotal statements that the complainant might make. Maybe both of them together just end up in this long note that would help us understand the problem they feel they're facing. Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm done.
Okay, so now we're going to check in with Haley Mahoney for public comment.
All right, we have one caller on the line. Let's see if they have a public comment to make. Caller, if you'd like to make public comment, please press *3 now. Okay, I am not seeing them enter the speaker queue, so I think we are good to move on from public comment.
Okay, well, if there are no objections, we will adjourn this meeting. Are there any objections?
None.
Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting will be held March 14th, 2022. Location of this meeting is yet to be determined, but it'll be posted prior to the meeting. Thank you so much to everyone today for their time.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.